Conversations with Eamon Dunphy on RTÉ Radio 1 with the Irish Times. Love every detail with Sports Saturday in the Irish Times.
Good morning and welcome to the programme. My guest this morning is a remarkable person by any standards in 1970. She was Ireland's first Eurovision Song Contest winner. She subsequently went on to be elected to the European Parliament and ran very respectably when she ran in the 1997 presidential election, polling 4 times as many votes as the official Labour Party candidate, Eddie Roche. Dana, good morning to you.
Good morning, Eamon.
I saw you on the Late Late Show last night. Did you enjoy the experience?
I did, actually. It was actually a very good show. It was very pacey and a lovely atmosphere, you know, in the studio. And I like being together with other artists and other guests, and you get to know other people. Life can be very, you know, insular. You know, you do your thing and then you don't actually get to meet. You know, I'm not a man about town like you. Like, no. You're in every gathering here.
Did you have a few jars in the green room afterwards?
I had a few. I had a cup of tea and I took a bottle of water. You know me.
Now, Dana, you're a Derry girl, but you were born in London. But
Yes.
Essentially, why did your family come to be in London?
Work. You know, we always had a huge unemployment problem in the north, and after the war, it was even worse. And my father moved to London looking for work, and he got work as a porter in the railway stations there and at the docks, and he worked as a coalman. And when he had enough, you know, steady work, then my mother followed on with the children that had been born in the north, and then 3 of us were born over in London.
How many of you were there altogether?
7 altogether. 1 died in infancy, so 6 of us left.
And was it a hard upbringing in London? Do you remember poverty, or do you remember worrying about?
I was too young, you know. Really, for me, it was kind of idyllic. And my mother and father, because my father worked in the railways, if he saw, and which he did a lot of Irish young men coming over looking for work in London, a lot of them had to sleep in the railways, and my father would just bring them home, and they were able to get a bomb-damaged house. Big, tall, like a Georgian house, loads of rooms in it, and they were just, anybody he found, he brought them home, and they'd live with us, and you know, they still actually keep in touch. There's a man from Dublin keeps in touch with my mother.
And your mum's still alive, because I saw you saying hello to her last night.
Yeah.
You can't do that this morning.
Yes, I can. Hello, Mum.
Now, Dana, your dad played a bit of music.
He did. He was a trumpet player. Well, he started off in the brass band, which at that time, you know, brass bands were in practically every town. And there was, I think, 2 or 3 in Derry. So he started in St. Colum's brass band that his father and grandfather had played in. So from he was about 6 years old, he was playing the cymbals, and he went up through the ranks, and he was a very fine trumpeter.
Now, you went back to Derry. Mm-hmm. Why?
My sister had chest problems, you know, breathing problems. And of course, the London smog.
Yes.
They were advised to go back to Derry. Plus, my mother was one of 13, and her mother was living in Derry, and that always draws you back.
And you went back to Rossville Street,
that's
and
right.
It was the Rossville Street flats, of course, that on Bloody Sunday, where most of the murder took place. Let me ask you about being a nationalist in the North before civil rights, before the Troubles.
Yes.
Did you feel like a second-class citizen? Because when one reflects, of course, that's what you were.
Well, we were aware that depending on what school you went to or what your name was, you could be discounted as far as jobs were concerned.
And your name, Brown, was
Yes, it was kind of an ambiguous kind of a name. You couldn't quite tell what it was. But we were also aware that the working class Protestant people in our town were in an equally difficult position.
Right.
And there was definitely an East-West divide in the north, in that, you know, a lot of the work and everything was sucked into Belfast. In a similar way, as I found recently, you know, representing the West, there's an East-West divide in this country.
Did you feel, therefore, benign about it, or did you feel resentful?
I was aware of it. You know, when you're growing up as a teenager, as a young teenager, you're obviously caught up in your life, and unless your family are very politically motivated or active, you're aware of it, and a lot depends on how your family approaches it as a young person, how you end up approaching it. And my father's family, part of them were Scottish Presbyterian.
Right.
So we were raised very carefully not to feel anger or resentment against Protestant people, because from we were little, we were aware that my father's cousin was an Orangeman who travelled over to the parades from Scotland, and he loved him.
Was your home a devout home? Were your parents devout, overtly?
They were pretty representative of most families at the time, you know, in that they went to Mass every Sunday. But so did everybody around us, you know. So you couldn't say they were devout as that they stood out from anybody else.
Right. And your own, you went to ballet school?
I did indeed. That was my big love. I wanted to be a ballet teacher.
Yeah.
How
old were you when you did this?
I started ballet when I was 6, and I just adored it. I also started Irish dancing when I was 6, because I loved any kind of dance, but you couldn't do the two, because at that time they conflicted, you know. So I did the ballet.
And when did you start to sing?
I think as soon as I could make any noise, I was singing, because my mother, and you've met my mother.
Yeah.
Some people enjoy music, and some people, it's part of their living, and it's part of her living. So there wasn't an evening that we didn't have musicians in our home.
Right.
And even yet, and she's turning 89 next week. Don't tell anybody I told you that, Eamon. But she cannot go to bed at night without sitting down at the piano and playing. And
what's her party piece?
She does When My Old Wedding Ring Was New.
Ah.
And every time she sings it, the tears trip me. She sings with her sister. Her sister's about the same age, and they'll sing in harmony. I can't even go in to hear them. The tears are tripping me.
As a matter of interest, what's your party piece?
My party piece? Well, would you believe it, Eamon? From I was young, if anybody asked me to sing at a gathering, I wouldn't remember the words of anything. And the only one I can remember the words of every time is Dublin and the Rare Old Times.
Really?
I love that song.
Pretty shocking for a lady. Incidentally, your husband Damien, does he sing?
He sings in the bath. He does. He was from a big family, you know. They told him he hadn't a note in his head. That
tradition of sort of sing-song in the house or sing-song at special gatherings is a nice Irish tradition. It seems to be dying out now.
It is, and in our own home, in fact, I think we're kind of guilty of that as well. And part of that is because, having been a singer, every time I sing, it embarrasses, especially my youngest. He'll say, "Don't do that." So I'm nearly not allowed to sing in my own home.
Were you good at school?
I had good years and had bad years. I had years when I was very focused and did my work. And I had years when I just skived off.
Well, you're a bit of a divil, because Dana, as I understand it, is the Irish for mischievous or
it is.
Bold. Were you bold?
I was at times.
What does boldness mean in this context?
Up to mischief, like Dublin school and going to the pictures. And I went to a convent school in beautiful grounds near the river, but you were never allowed down to the river. But sure, we'd often take off and innocent things, you know, but you were...
Boys?
Boys? Of course.
What?
Of course.
Yeah.
Heading off for the day. And I remember one time, well, I shouldn't really be telling...
You're all right, come on.
Children turned off the radio. And we all hitched down to Portrush for the day, where my aunt lived. And I was in fear. It ruined the day for me, because I was sure my aunt, who lived about 4 miles away from the beach, would suddenly appear. Tell my mother.
You were a boy?
Oh, no, there was a whole gang of us.
There was, yeah.
There was about 6 of us went down there for the day. Which that's what memories are made of, you know.
Okay, now, just let me ask you about the Eurovision, because it happened when you were so young. You were 17.
Yeah, well, I was 18, actually, but 18. I'm willing to lie.
Okay, no, 18 is fine. You entered the Irish...
the National Song Contest, yeah. I'd entered the year before, and I auditioned, like everybody else, in Dublin, and Tom McGrath, remember Tom McGrath was head of Light Entertainment?
In RTÉ, yes.
And it was Tom who remembered me from 1969. And he called up just before Christmas, at the end of 1969. He said, Rosie Mary, he always called me Rosie Mary. He says, I have a song here, would you like to sing it in the upcoming National Song Contest? And that was all kinds of everything.
Right. And, okay, before we go on, let's take your first choice of music. This is a lovely song by the Beatles, If I Fell. And it's from the album A Hard Day's Night, which I remember. Tell me why, the Beatles.
It really captures an era of my life. The time we're talking about, heading out down to Portrush, down to the river, taking the day off and going to the pictures. So we had a really strong group of friends. That the friendships formed when I was about 10, and the friendships are still intact. And we're still very close. And when I hear the Beatles records, I remember us gathering. We used to wear our black polo necks and Aran jumpers and black stretch trousers, and we'd be off with a bag of chips on a Friday evening, and we just loved each other, and we'd a great bunch of friends, and this, for me, it conjures up those days.
Okay. Dana, after the Eurovision, let me talk to you about the Eurovision. I'm sure you've told stories many, many times about it. All Kinds of Everything was the song. No one really thought you were going to win. So a great surprise.
Oh, yeah, shock, I think, is the word we're looking for here, Eamon.
Yeah.
Total shock. Because we weren't even considered in the running, because we never won. Which, for me, really took the pressure off,
Yep.
and I'd never been abroad before. And being in Amsterdam, my mother and my grandmother came with me, and nobody interviewed me except the Irish team. So we were like tourists there for a week. And I didn't go to watch anyone rehearse, because I knew if I compared myself to the other artists, I would lose all confidence.
It's worth pointing out, perhaps, that although the Eurovision has become a bit of a joke now, ABBA won the Eurovision.
Oh, yes.
It was at one time, like, big acts were there. Celine Dion, Cliff Richard, people like that. So it was serious stuff.
Oh, huge. And it was also important for us as a small country. It wasn't just a musical acceptance. I mean, we're probably one of the most musical countries in Europe. But it was also a political, affirmation that you're in there, you're one of the leaders,
Yeah, we've seen that with sports winners as well.
Yes.
And so when you came back, you are now a national celebrity, and of course a European celebrity. But here, did any of your friends react differently to you? Was there a hard
It's
part?
funny, Eamon, because by that time, my close friends, and we have close friends and we have friends, my close friends had known me since I was 10, and nothing shakes a friendship like that. And I found with my close friends, it didn't shake it. And maybe I'd be away travelling I mightn't see them for a year. And you meet them and you pick up where you left off.
But other people would be maybe want to feel, because they feel they don't want to impose on you, or they feel shy about it. It's a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and generally people would be insecure because they don't know you and they don't know how you're going to react. Whereas the ones who really know you stick with you. Now,
you really were a novice when you went to Eurovision.
Oh, yes.
It's fair to say, and I think you remarked to Pat Kenny last night about that.
Yeah.
And then you had to come home and learn to be a pro.
That's right, yes.
And your second record didn't do very well.
No, I think flop.
Well, I was going to say
springs
bombed.
to mind.
Okay, but how did you deal with that?
It was the best thing ever happened to me. Because up until that time, I felt as though I was caught up in a whirlwind that I had no control over. And at 18, basically I thought I knew exactly what I was doing in my life. I'd already applied to teachers' training college. Depending on my results, that's what I was doing. I was going there. I knew what I wanted in life. I felt in control of my life. And then, boom, I won the Eurovision. I was young. I looked younger. And basically people were patting me on the head. I'm not talking about in Ireland. I'm talking about in the business.
Yes.
I'd go to Germany, or sometimes I was in 3 countries in one day. An amazing schedule. I was exhausted nearly all the time.
Were you happy during that?
Up and down, with some very difficult emotional times to deal with. And inside of me, I was a musician. I mean, I wasn't a singer. Piano was my main subject, and I was a musician. I knew how much I didn't know.
Yes.
I knew I wasn't the greatest singer in the world. My mother, to this day, will tell you, "Hey, you're not too bad, your sister's much better voice than you." I say, "I know, Mommy." I know that. I knew I wasn't the best out there. I knew how much I didn't know. And I was dealing with all those inner insecurities and learning to know myself. So yes, there were very difficult times. But I think I gradually, by the time the second record was a flop, I had a really good agent, a lovely Jewish man called Dick Katz. And he sat me down and he says, "Right." He says, "Now, you can either go back to normal life or you can stay and fight." And I thought, for the first time, I have a choice here. And maybe that's just the fighter in me. I said, "I'll stay and fight."
Right.
And we did.
Now, one of the most traumatic events for people in Derry came 2 years after your Eurovision win, Bloody Sunday.
Yes.
Where were you when you heard about that?
I was in England. I was doing...
Now, this happened in Rossville Flats, which is just down below
yes,
where you lived.
Absolutely. And my grandmother was there and my uncle was there and relatives, cousins were all in that area. We were over in... I was doing pantomime and my mother and I were staying with my Uncle Brandon and Pearl. And we heard the car... And I was sick at the time, actually. I had a terrible flu, I remember. Just a sense of disbelief. Of course, we'd been through the Battle of the Bog Site,
yes,
living in the flats.
Yes.
So we were well aware of the extent of violence, but it was, in a funny way, it wasn't a deadly violence. It was stone throwing and it was baton charging and it was CS gas and it was all of that, but it wasn't. Mostly it wasn't a deadly violence. Yes, there were some tragic deaths, but when that happened, it was a turning point. And one of the young boys who was killed, and I write about this actually, and one of them lived above us in the flats, and my mother knew his mother from they were very young, and her thought was, "I need to get back, to speak to his mother." And we did as soon as we could. We went back and sat with the mother and father, and they were just devastated. Because these were not just names on a page to us. These were people that either we knew personally or we knew through a circle of friends.
Now tell me about meeting your husband, Damien.
Damien and his sister and brother owned a hotel in Newry in Northern Ireland. And I don't know about you, but growing up, we never went to hotels because we couldn't afford to go to hotels.
We didn't, no.
And this was a very lovely hotel. But anyway, we had a mutual friend, a priest, a monk in the north of Ireland, Father Thomas O'Neill. And he was raising money to take children, Catholic and Protestant children, on holiday together. Get them out of the situation, help them to know each other. And, it was his contribution to peace. Anyway, he asked Damien to donate the hotel for the night, and he asked me, would I do a concert? Looking back, I think he was matchmaking.
Yes.
But at the time, I flew in and I did the concert, and that was 1972. And that was the first time I met my one and only.
Was it love at first sight?
I think it was... well, he tells me that he knew from the minute he met me that he was going to... he wanted to marry me. And I was very cagey, I was still getting to know myself. And I was very cagey about marriage, I didn't want...
you were in a business that's notorious for promiscuity and
yes,
all of that stuff. You'd avoided all of that. Or are there skeletons in your cupboard that you'd care to share with us this morning?
You never met my father. My father travelled with me. And men liked my father. He was a real man's man.
Right.
He loved to... He'd put a bet on the horses, and he had a great sense of humour, and he was a musician, and they really liked him.
So he avoided all that stuff.
He spoiled my chances on so many occasions, Eamon.
Has your heart ever been broken, incidentally, as a young girl?
Of course.
It had been.
Of course. I remember going weak at the knees at school. See, literally, you could hardly stand up seeing this fellow walk towards me that I really, really liked. And then he dated somebody else. Of course, life is about broken hearts and picking up and going on.
Now, I know because I've read your book, which you're signing in Easton's today at 12:30, incidentally. You've written an autobiography.
Yes.
And in that you describe, your insecurities and your fears, and how Damien, in particular, has been a very important friend as well as a lover
Yes.
and husband. Tell me what you think the source of those fears were, because at one point you sat down with Damien and you decided you'd talk every day about the things that were troubling you and making you feel insecure. What was the source of that?
I think all of those are based in our childhood. Nearly all of the problems we face as adults have their roots in our childhood. And sometimes we bury them so deep, we don't actually know what caused them. And I had a very bad self-image. I always felt ugly. And probably it was a comment made,
Yes.
when I was younger. And I was always afraid of anger. I was always...
Yes.
I felt that if
Conflict.
you got angry, that in actual fact that was somehow a devastation of a relationship if you got angry. So I would avoid getting angry. I would try to work it out.
But you were suppressing a lot of stuff.
Oh, I'm
presumably.
absolutely. And Damien was very helpful to me in that. He said, at the end of each day, we'll sit down and we'll talk about the good things that happened, getting to know each other, the things you did that, instead of saying, you make me mad, or you did that, to say, when you did that, it made me feel good, or when you did that, it made me feel upset.
Okay, we're going to take your second piece of music now. It's Nasandoma, performed by the three tenors. Tell me why you just like the song.
I adore the song. The first time I heard it, and I love classical music because I studied classical music and I love it. But I heard it at the World Cup. They used it as a theme on the World Cup.
That's right.
And I thought, this is the first time I'd ever seen classical music in a setting that was so down to earth, And then I worked with Placido Domingo.
Yes.
And a gentleman. And I was interviewing him one time and I asked him, why did the three tenors come together for this? Because I knew that Jose Ferreira had been very, very ill. And he said, first of all, we all love football. And secondly, we wanted to help our friend who was
yes.
getting over a very devastating illness. So they came together with a love of sport, but with a love of each other. So when I hear it, I think of them and I think, wow, this is amazing.
Okay. Dana, at a certain point in your life, you went to the United States with Damien.
Yes.
And you became a TV star on a US Christian channel, is that?
Yes, it's a Catholic teaching network called EWTN.
Let me ask you about your deep religious convictions and how they were formed.
Well, I suppose basically in my own home, which I say was never anything extraordinary. It was kind of similar of people around us. And then I think I went through a number of years where it was like one step forward and 10 steps back. And as an adult, I had to find my own kind of level, my own spiritual level in my life. And I think a big turning point for me was when I had the cancer scare with my voice.
Yes.
And
this was when you were 24, 25, 26?
Yes, right in the middle 70s, right at an amazing time in my career. I had a growth on the vocal cords, which was not benign.
Which was benign?
Which was not, I beg your pardon, which was not malignant.
Yes.
But it was a very serious operation for any singer. They had to cut a piece out of the cord, and I had to learn to talk again, speak again, sing again. And it was just a period when all my props were taken away. I had no career. I couldn't even speak. And it's a time when you really look at your life. And during that time, I think my own faith deepened. And then, of course, about a year after that, Damien and I married. And 2 years after that, we married. And I think you think a great deal about yourself and your values when you have children. And so it deepened again. And it's really been an anchor in my life, Eamon. It has given me an inner sense of peace. It doesn't take away problems.
No.
It doesn't take away troubles. but it gives me a way of dealing with my life that keeps me on an even keel. It gives me a great sense of peace, that I know there's a God that loves me. And
do you pray every day?
I do.
Do you go to Mass once a week?
Oh, I do, yeah.
Confession?
Yeah. I'm a wee bit on a slippery slope with that one, because I have a hesitancy about going to confession. Isn't that funny? As long as I don't know the priest, he doesn't know who I am.
What's it like to go to confession when you're Dana, and when the priest knows?
That's what I'm talking about.
You can't have the anonymity.
It's okay. You just go to Art Mongolia every week. But I think most.
But that
people,
is a factor, yes.
Oh yeah, most people have a little hesitancy about going to confession, and yet it makes perfect sense. To face up what you want to change in your life, start with a clean slate and try to make it better the next time.
Dana, for all of the music in your life and your career as an entertainer, people now think of you, I think, first as a political activist, as someone who ran for the presidency, and also, of course, somebody who was elected as an MEP for Connacht Ulster. And they know you also for your pro-life activism and your Catholic conservatism, I think is fair to say. Let me ask you about the hostility you encountered. For example, when you wanted to run for the presidency. Fintan O'Toole in the Irish Times sneered, "The very absurdity of the idea is significant, for it arises from what must be desperation on a heroic scale." Now, this is one of our most respected columnists in our most respected newspaper, basically sneering at your aspirations. And Vincent Browne notably savaged you on the radio as well. Was that hurtful, that kind of comment?
It was embarrassing. I remember that very well the day somebody faxed the article to me, that Dan Fintan had written. And listen, everybody has the right to whatever they think, and they have the right to print it. But he didn't know me. He didn't know my motivation. And I think he was dealing with his own problems that he had with the church, and he was kind of personifying it in me. But when it arrived in our house, I didn't want my children to see it, because you don't want your children to be hurt or embarrassed.
But there's another kind of snobbery at play here, and as someone who played football and was a sportsman, I understand this. That the idea that you're an entertainer and that you want to do something serious in politics or a footballer is an absurd idea to people of a certain mindset.
Yes.
Ronald Reagan became president of the United States despite them, and many other people have made those transitions.
Yes.
It is hurtful then.
Well, yes, it does embarrass you, and yet inside of me I was thinking, well, I can understand why they think that. They don't know me at all. I've never made any public statements about where I stand, because I felt I was an entertainer, paid to entertain, not actually to stand on a soapbox. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I felt I was paid to entertain, and that's what I would do. Now, if anybody asked me, I'd answer. But I could, at the same time, understand him in that, as far as they were concerned, all I did was sing. I didn't have any thoughts in my head. I think it was a wrong presumption. And I ended up talking about illiberal liberals. And
Yes.
Yes, I think we had a huge problem with that. And one of the good things, I think, that came out of my presidential run was it did force people to look at their own openness, their own, were they really liberal? You can't be liberal if you say you're acceptable, but only if you accept and say what I say and think what I think. And I hope that we grew through that experience. Some people, I remember being told that you were going to interview me, and I was told, he can be very tough. He could really savage you in that interview. And I lifted the phone. I was standing, I can tell you, I was standing on a street corner on a mobile phone, waiting for you to do an interview with you. And my hand was shaking like this. I thought, what's he going to say to me?
Good. That's the image I'm trying to send out.
You were so open, and you had no agenda, and you allowed me to speak.
Well, the point about some of these boys is that they claim to be feminists, and they claim to be for the people, quote unquote. But when they actually meet a woman who belongs to the people, the whole theory falls apart.
I do think we have to look at that. We have to look at, allowing people to speak.
Let me ask you about the 2002 referendum on abortion.
Yes.
And at that stage, I want to get to the root and strength of your convictions, Dana, because even then you fell out or disagreed with other people, including Cardinal Connell, who wanted to compromise and get a yes vote. They agreed with the politicians and the political establishment to get a compromise. Yet you refused to accept that compromise, which in this debate, this very important debate, places you, as it were, more conservative than Cardinal Connell, who's not known as a raging liberal. Tell me about the roots of your belief there.
Well, it's a very complicated subject, and you'll have to read that chapter, but I'll tell you basically...
Well, yes, indeed.
It was very complicated, and it came down to the information that I had. And because I was on the committee in Europe drawing up the guidelines for stem cell research using embryos, involving the killing of embryos. So I was on the committee drawing up the guidelines. I'd been on it for a year before I read the wording.
Right.
And it was very clear that the wording was pushing all the buttons of where Europe wanted to go. The bottom line was they wanted stem cell research. They wanted to be able to destroy embryos.
Yes.
And actually that's a very new field where there has been no success to date. And there was plenty of opportunity to use stem cells from placenta, from cord, from all different
the stem cell research
stem
in the view of many people is a huge scientific breakthrough that can help paraplegic, it can help cure cancers, it can do all kinds of
basically
wonderful things.
Stem cell research is a wonderful area, but you do not have to kill embryos in order to have successful stem cell research. You do not. But that was what Europe wanted, and they wanted to use taxpayers' money to do it. And that was against European rules. They wouldn't put through Europe what was not an agreement for all countries. And they were determined to do it. And that was the basis of what that wording was about. So I wasn't in disagreement with the bishops on the protection of life at all. But the wording, it was the interpretation of the wording and the information that we both had. We were perfectly in agreement on the protection of unborn life.
Do you find, Bertie Ahern asked you on a couple of occasions to join Fianna Fáil, and he assured you that you'd get a winnable seat. Do you find that the political establishment, and you have vast experience of it now from your years as an MEP and as a campaigner, is very much out of touch with reality, and also is foisting things upon people, particularly through the European project that people know nothing about?
Oh, quite. But I think people know that. You know, the political leadership on all of the parties, I think, are racing ahead of their grassroots. And I said at the time when I was running, you cannot be following an agenda that's laid down in Europe, or the lead that is laid down in Europe. The majority of our laws are decided in Brussels, not in the Dáil.
No.
How can you be following and at the same time looking to see what your people want? We saw that with the discrimination against women working in the home, or parents working in the home. There was uproar in the country, and yet nothing was done to change the tax laws.
Let me ask you finally about the abortion thing. I mean, the no side won narrowly.
That's right.
Which does leave the door open for abortion if a future government were to decide.
Well, the difficulty was that if we had voted yes, one of our greatest pro-life people in this country who died at that time, O'Hanlon, who was a judge, very respected judge, he said that the wording was intrinsically evil, and that if it had been passed, that it would have opened the door to wide-scale abortion, and so it would have. And so you have a status quo at the moment. We are where we are. We still don't have. And, you know, I'm very, very involved in pro-life work, and I'm as deeply concerned about the mother as I am about her unborn child. And I've worked with so many women who have been deeply wounded through abortion. So when you're talking about life, for me, it starts at conception, it goes all the way through, and I'm just as concerned at every stage of that life.
A final question before we call in the last piece of music, because it's been such an engaging conversation. Are you going to pursue another political career?
I don't have any intentions of running for elected office, but it says in our Constitution that every citizen has a political duty to protect and uphold the Constitution. And I always use this phrase: if you go to sleep in a democracy, you wake up in a dictatorship.
Okay, Dana, thank you very much. And before we go, we're going to take one of your own songs. It's called A New Day. It's from your new album, which is also out now.
Yes.
And tell me about it. It's your feelings on the North.
Yes, I wrote it actually before the peace initiative was signed. And it's basically, it was me basically saying that we're actually in a time, this is the time for peace.
Okay, so listen to the words, and Dana will be signing that album also today at Celtic Note. Did I get the plug in?
Oh, it's a good job you remembered that, or Katie would have had your head in a platter.
Is everybody happy? Okay. Thank you very much, Dana. It's been a delight to meet you. It always is a delight to meet you. Thank you
the
very much.
The same here, Eamon. I respect you very much.
Conversations with Eamon Dunphy on RTÉ Radio 1 with the Irish Times Saturday magazine for what's hot and what's not in fashion, food and travel.